So welcome to the People's Theater Inquest. On the afternoon of September 21st, 2019, Anderson Darwin Antelope Sr., known to his friends and family as Andy, age 58, died at Walmart in Riverton, Wyoming. This is not a real inquest and is in no way meant to be a substitute for a real one. But since a real one was proposed by the Fremont County coroner, but was thwarted by the Fremont County attorney by refusing to enforce subpoenas for witnesses to appear, and by the city of Riverton by refusing to cooperate, it did prompt the idea of our doing a mock inquest that we are calling the People's Theater Inquest, which gives us an opportunity to allow more conversation. This tragic event encompasses more than what happened during a brief few minutes. Unfortunately, it could be repeated with others if the community fails to learn from this. So now, let the People's Theater Inquest begin, and I will call the first witness, County Attorney Patrick J. LeBrun.
A public inquest is superfluous because inquests by law exist to determine the cause and manner of the subject's death. And the county contracted forensic pathologist, James Wilkerson, already has pronounced the cause and manner of Antelope's death. The forensic pathologist has determined this to be a homicide and the manner to be a gunshot wound. It is a settled matter.
Former county coroner, Mark Stratton.
According to the Wyoming Supreme Court, a coroner's inquest is an executive matter outside the courts. The coroner is not prosecutor nor judge. The coroner is a facilitator that presents the evidence of an investigation so that the public jury can determine the manner and cause of death. While the autopsy has been completed, our investigation has not. Even before the DCI investigation, Mr. LeBrun has formed an opinion without having all the evidence. Of the 768 inquests on file in this office, 2 were presented by the county attorney at the request of the coroner at the time.
So our next witness is about the body cameras and the in-car video cameras.
The Riverton Police Department does not currently, nor have they ever, purchased body cameras for officers to use. Additionally, the police department has a policy that specifically prohibits an officer from recording contacts with citizens, except with recording devices purchased and provided by the police department. The police department no longer uses in-car video surveillance systems.
Our next witness,
The Riverton Police Department received a call at 13:32:13 of an intoxicated man at Walmart. The call was assigned to Officer James K. Donahue, who reports to dispatch about 13 minutes later that he is in front of Walmart at the Veteran Barbecue with Anderson Antelope. Anderson Antelope warns Officer Donahue that he will not come peacefully. Officer Donahue has had prior contact with Anderson Antelope and knows that he can be violent, but he does not call or wait for backup. Officer Donahue uses his right hand to grab Anderson Antelope's left wrist. Anderson Antelope, with his right hand, picks up a knife. Officer Donahue admits to continuing to hold Andy Antelope's left wrist, while Anderson Antelope has a knife in his right hand. Officer Donahue refuses to release Anderson Antelope and does not seek distance. Officer Donahue says he orders Anderson Antelope 3 times to drop the knife or he would shoot. Officer Donahue aims his service weapon behind Anderson Antelope's left ear. An intentional lethal target. Witnesses say that Anderson Antelope fell from the chair right after the shot. From the beginning of contact until the fatal shot was 7 minutes and 14 seconds. 20 minutes from the time dispatch had been called. Officer Donahue should have called and waited for backup. He could have let go of Andy's left arm and distanced himself from danger. Officer Donahue had the physical means, advantage of stance, and the time to create a protective distance.
And the seventh witness is an eyewitness account.
At approximately 1:45, a man came and sat down at a table for our customers to use. I became aware of this person when he started complaining about no one waiting on him. The man was Anderson Antelope. The customer did not give anyone any problems while he was sitting at the table. A Riverton police vehicle came from the south and parked on the north side in front of our trailer. The police officer approached the customer and started talking to him. I was watching the customer and the officer. While listening and watching the officer, who was leaning toward the customer, asking him to come with him, I heard the customer tell the officer that he was not going to go with them. One of the people in our trailer told the officer to leave the customer alone and that he was not going to be giving us any trouble. The officer stated that he had to do his job. At that point, the officer stepped to the side of the customer and attempted to assist him to stand up by having his left hand around the customer's left wrist and his right hand under the customer's left underarm. I have no idea where the knife came from, but I saw the knife swing toward and strike the officer in the center of the chest. The officer jumped backwards to the left of the customer towards the wall of Walmart and facing the customer, who was still holding the knife out in front of him in his right hand. The officer told the customer 2 times to drop the knife. The customer would not release the knife. It appeared to me that the customer started to swing the knife toward the officer. That is when the officer fired his weapon.
Another eyewitness account.
I saw this male walking up the sidewalk who appeared intoxicated, so I thought I should offer him some food. My brother gave him a broth, and he sat down at one of the tables provided. I saw an officer. I heard him say something about the extent of his blood alcohol being too high. The officer kept trying to get him to stand up, but the male was not standing up, and the officer wasn't able to get him up. The officer was facing me, and I said something to him. I don't remember what. He made eye contact with me. Perhaps that distracted the officer. At that same moment, the male pulled a knife out of his right boot and swung it at the officer, striking the officer in the chest. It appeared to knock the officer back. The officer took a step back, drew the handgun, pointed it at the male, and said, "Drop the knife." I believe he said it 2 times and then fired his weapon. I don't think he should have been shot. The officer should have taken the knife away from him.
So, a question from the photographs about whether Anderson Antelope had on boots, as the previous witness said, or white shoes.
Pictures taken of the body after the shooting shows that Anderson Antelope had on white sports shoes that day.
Thank you. And our next witness is another eyewitness account.
The gentleman asked, "Is anyone going to help me?" A lady helped him get money out of his wallet and provided it to me. He asked me for 2 shots of whiskey, and I told him that they don't sell whiskey. I asked if he wanted Mountain Dew, and he said that would be okay. I cooked the food, brought it to where he was seated, and placed it in front of him. About 5 minutes later, a police officer arrived and was speaking with him. I saw the officer trying to have him provide a breath sample into a breathalyzer. I was cleaning up and I heard the officer say, "You are going to need to come with me." The officer reached for him, but the gentleman stated that he was not going with the officer. I had walked back to dump the ice out. As I was walking back, I heard the officer say, "Drop the knife, drop the knife." Then I heard a shot.
Another eyewitness account.
I was ordering food at a food trailer, and I saw this male sitting alone at the south table. The next thing I heard was the male ask, "Could you just take me to the hospital?" The officer responded, "Will you blow for me?" The male said yes. Then the officer went to his vehicle and retrieved a breath test machine. I heard the officer say to him, "No, you need to blow." Then the male asked, "Can I take my food?" The officer replied, "Yeah, you can take your food." The officer again tried to get the male to blow into the portable breath test machine. The officer said, "You can't spit into the straw, you need to blow. I'm just going to take you." The officer then threw the straw on the plate of food in front of the male, who then said to the officer, "Now you're pissing me off." I then saw the officer grab the male's left hand with his left hand. I saw the male twist, grab a knife with his right hand, and hit the officer in the chest with the knife. The male had to swing the knife across his own chest to reach the officer. The officer then pulled his handgun out, pointed to the male, and said, "Drop the knife," 3 times. The officer didn't step away and continued to hold the male's left wrist. The officer shot the male and continued to hold his wrist until he was on the ground.
Our next witness is, what about that wrist hold?
Anderson Antelope was too intoxicated and disabled to go anywhere, so why was there a wrist hold on him? About 4 minutes are missing from the DCI reports where we cannot determine what happened leading up to the officer Donahue taking a hold of Anderson Antelope's wrist and for how long he kept that hold. As a former police officer, I know about that hold. It hurts. The pain is so excruciating that someone will do almost anything to get it to stop. When I was in law enforcement, we were trained to let loose of such a wrist hold if it was causing too much pain and potentially putting us in danger from the person we were detaining or arresting. It could be that Anderson Antelope felt that he had no choice but to try to stop the pain. Did the autopsy and investigation check for bruises on Anderson Antelope's left wrist? The answer is not. To answer that question could help determine what really happened that day and whether the killing of Anderson Antelope could have been avoided by the officer by simply letting go of Anderson Antelope's wrist.
Next, we have testimony from a witness who saw no attempt to stab the officer.
Anderson Antelope did not stab or swing a knife toward the officer. I watched the entire activity other than 3 seconds when I was speaking to a member of the veterans group. I don't believe that the officer could have been stabbed by Anderson Antelope in such a short time. The officer shot Anderson Antelope for no reason.
The next witness is a witness who saw the attempt to stab the officer.
A Native American male approached the veteran barbecue on a cart. He was asked if he needed any help, and he responded with, "Send me to Mars." He was slurring his words and not speaking coherently. He left shortly after that. Later, a police officer approached the same person who was sitting at a table. The male was agitated and quarreled with the officer and refused to leave with the officer. He drew a knife, and the officer ordered him to drop it 2 times. The officer then drew his weapon, secured the male's left wrist, and the male swung the knife with his right hand into the officer's chest. The officer shot the male in the head as the male tried to swing at the officer a second time.
Opinion when the knife is involved.
My prior knowledge of law enforcement training and the 21-foot rule that states a knife-wielding assailant within 21 feet can stab a person before a weapon can be drawn to defend oneself indicates that this is a justified shooting. The presence of the knife eliminates all racial prejudice in this incident and makes it simply a case of self-defense.
Evidence from the officer's vest.
I examined the duty vest that the officer was wearing at the time of the shooting. I noted that there was a small cut halfway down the vest on the Velcro flap. This cut appeared to only penetrate through the topmost layer of the vest and did not create any observed damage to the ceramic plate. Because of the lack of damage, I was unable to compare the tool marks to the knife that was recovered from the scene and reported as the knife used to stab the officer in the chest area.
Description of the knife.
Most witnesses who saw the knife used by Anderson Antelope identified it as a black-handled kitchen knife with approximately 6-inch blade. One witness described the knife as having a 3-inch blade. Using photos from the scene to denote a scale or measurement, the blade appears no longer than 4 inches.
Knowledge about Anderson Antelope's condition.
7. He was a man in his early 40s then, struggling with alcohol addiction. When intoxicated, he could be hard to manage, irritable, and confused. But sober, Andy was pleasant, with a good sense of humor and cooperative.
It's my conviction that he would have been under mental health supervision at the time. Should have been, but wasn't. He was a gentle person who nevertheless had addiction issues and had been committed involuntarily to the Wyoming State Hospital in Evanston. However, due to limited space, he was released from the state hospital, after which he spent time receiving mental health care in Lander, was released, and stayed at Sage West Healthcare in Riverton. His stay at Sage West was cut short because he hadn't had a current psychological evaluation. I'm not judging whether he had the right to be at Walmart, but I am saying that he should not have been released from mental health care.
The next witness talk about his blood alcohol concentration and what a blood alcohol concentration of 0.285 means.
Anderson Antelope was severely incapacitated. A BAC refers to the percentage of alcohol that is in a person's bloodstream. In this case, it was 2.85 parts alcohol for every 1,000 parts blood. Being above 0.250, he likely would have needed assistance walking, been in a stupor, that is, been insensible and near unconsciousness, have been severely physically disabled, had total mental confusion, had marked muscular incoordination, and had markedly decreased response to stimuli.
The next witness will talk about what Anderson Antelope needed.
The officer told Andy he was being placed under arrest. He became angry during this time and was yelling. When the officer tried to calm him, one of the witnesses began speaking to the officer, diverting his attention from the intoxicated man. This momentary distraction that receives the only blame so far outside of Andy appears to have allowed Andy sufficient stealth to retrieve a concealed knife using his right hand. Andy then attempted to drive the knife into the officer's chest, but was thwarted by the rifle plate in the center of the officer's vest. The officer then drew his firearm and ordered Andy to drop the knife. While holding Andy's wrist, the officer shot him in the head, killing him instantly. 5 hours after the shooting, the county coroner's office was called. The fact that Andy's blood alcohol content was 0.285 indicates to me that he was incapable of rational thought or coordinated physical activity. I feel that Andy Antelope was a man in need of a friend.
Our next witness is a prior threat to stab police by Anderson Antelope.
Another officer reported to DCI afterwards that Anderson Antelope, while at the hospital with him, had previously threatened to take an officer out back and stab him. A later pat-down did not locate any knives on Anderson Antelope. A review of the prior police report did not include a threat of stabbing.
Prior law enforcement contacts with Anderson Antelope.
Anderson Antelope had a total of 296 contacts with law enforcement from April 16th, 1995 until he died. Of the 296 times, 219 of those times he was intoxicated. Of the 296 times, emergency medical services were needed 66 times, and 77 times resulted in his being taken to a hospital. Of the 296 times, violent actions towards others were recorded 27 times, including law enforcement and hospital staff, plus 25 times he made aggressive remarks. His average blood alcohol content for the 95 times detailed was 0.254%. He was arrested 130 times and cited 113 times. He was issued trespassing notices 6 times. He was taken to a detox facility 12 times.
And our last witness is Anderson Antelope, was a father.
My dad was a good person who always told me to treat people the way you want to be treated. I was disciplined when I upset my siblings. My dad always told me to pray when I felt bad about something I was stressed about. He even gave me advice about how my girlfriend would not like my kid's mom. He explained that my girlfriend saw her as a threat to our relationship. My dad always told me he loved me. I miss my dad's laugh and smile. My dad started drinking a lot after my grandma passed away. That bothered him emotionally a lot. I never saw him drink so much. I believe the officer killed my dad for no reason other than having ill intentions towards his race. Once when I told a police officer at the city park when I was with some friends that the officer didn't need to shoot my dad in the head, he responded with, "Why? What you gonna do about it?" I turned to walk away and he said, "Yeah, keep walking." A girl with me at the time recorded it on her phone. I miss my dad more than anything. He was one of the humblest persons I know. He was a sun dancer. Sun dancers respect food and water a lot. Having to suffer for food will make any person come to cherish food and water. My dad was sitting at the Veterans Barbecue enjoying a hot dog when the officer came up behind him and could see that my dad was not bothering anybody. 7 minutes later, he killed him. I would like to ask everyone for prayers and for justice. God bless. Source: taken from a letter from Anderson Antelope Jr., written from Fremont County Jail in 2020.
Had there been a real inquest, it was proposed that there would be at least 3 jurors, or maybe more. And so we have 3 mock jurors.
So I'm honored to be here tonight as the first Northern Arapaho woman serving in our state legislature on the House side. After tonight's mock presentation and just a fraction of the tiny information that was presented in the investigation, and as a member of the mock jury, I'm going to rule that this death of Andy Antelope was not justified. It was not.
Mr. Antelope is a perfect example of when people find themselves on the margins, life is more dangerous. Hearing the evidence of the inquest, I want to make it black and white, as some of the witnesses did. But that's not the way that it works. And it can't be black and white. We don't use the same levels for people, the same levels of lethal force for children, for people who are disabled, for people who do not have as much power and the weaponry that you have. And therefore, I would also give the same verdict as Representative Clifford, that Mr. Anderson's Antelope death was unjustified and a disproportionate response to the situation that the officer faced.
And while I appreciate the summary and the amount of work that's gone into tonight, I think that the greater community as a whole would benefit greatly if all of the information came to light, if there was a full inquest, as the coroner requested. I would really love to see in the future that Andy gets the respect that he deserved. Due to all of this and the lack of an inquest, the cause of death on Andy's birth or death certificate says undetermined. And that's not okay. We are a part of this history. And if we're going to create the future where we all get the respect that we believe Andy deserves, then we're going to have to do more.